Hey guys, this is Bosuke here. I'm just here to talk to you about the wonderful Wave 13 that we just released, except it's not wonderful, it's just a wave, it's just a map wave. It's cool, everything's cool, we're alright, we can move forward with this introduction, no matter how terrible it may be. Okay, so Wave 13, right. So the first real big surprise about Wave 13 for I think everyone on the staff team was it was routine. I mean, we had sort of this new system that we implemented last wave in Wave 12, which was very new to us at the time, which resulted in a lot of delays. We actually had to repeat the map testing period because we had issues with map voting, although at the time players could not see that. So that was interesting. And then we had delays with the trailer and everything. So we ended up releasing that wave months after we started. And I don't think that was fun for anyone. So I think the biggest success that we had this wave, and really it is sort of our standard, why we're going to try to go ahead with this as our standard for waves moving forward, is because we were able to do everything sort of just like that. Almost in a routine fashion. We did not quite release everything we wanted to in terms of material, but as far as the deadlines that we set for ourselves and that we set for various things entering the community, we hit all of those. We got our wave done our live testing done in one go, and as far as that went, everything was a-okay. We did end up trimming a number of maps that were initially submitted. That was the plan going forward. I think we had a good selection of maps that were being live tested, that were voted on, and as a result we ended up with a pretty good map wave all around from what I've seen. So as with any project on the scale of this rotation, we didn't just work with an individual or a certain group, we had to work with the whole of the community. And we got a lot of help on this from both map makers and staff members alike. And on both of those fronts, you sort of have to start with Zelasi, who just did so much work on this rotation. It's kind of hard to overstate the amount of work she did, because she did everything from making maps for the rotation and helping other people with their maps, to getting all the configs set, to compiling a lot of the data for our both in-game and forum voting, to even making the trailer that eventually went up on the MCPVP channel and a few other people's channels. So she really did a lot of the work for this wave just by herself through sheer force of will, and it took days upon days upon days to do it. But our map wave ended up being so much better for it, and I can't thank her enough. In a similar vein, Galathunder really helped us out a lot more even than he did last wave with all the maps he submitted. Since, you know, he's a new member of the staff team, he joined the committee in thinning out maps and in getting a lot of maps set up for the rotation. And he also designed the new spawn boxes that you see on a lot of maps. So again, the work he put in was invaluable for us. The rest of the committee also put in, I guess I'd say, varying degrees of work. There were a few people who just didn't want to have much to do with the rotation, and in a way we were able to move more quickly just because they sort of stepped out of the way and let the people who were more focused on it put in their effort and just focus on that without having to wait for people who were less engaged in the process. And that sped things up this time around as well. And of course this was a little bit of a scary wave for us because we weren't working with Nam on this for the first time, and of course he had designed the whole config system and everything that we'd been used to working with. So instead, Chicken Putty and Signature had stepped in for a lot of things, putting maps in rotation, making our new configs playable, and so on. And they were also the reason why we were able to put up a map wave trailer on the full MCPVP channel for the first time ever. And we got a lot more attention for that trailer than we would have otherwise for that reason. So they really did help out a lot in that regard too, and it was great to be able to work with the admin team on a CTF map wave for the first time in what feels like forever. I know we'd been working with Nam, but he always sort of felt more like a member of the CTF community than anything else, and being able to sort of reach across the divide, because there is a little bit of a divide between the CTF staff and everyone else, and work on this map wave with the admin team was fantastic, and I think it is a sign of good things to come. Also, I'd just like to give a huge shout out to all of the map makers who put in so much work for this wave. Even if your maps weren't selected for live testing or weren't selected for the rotation, every submission helped us, and we had a really, really varied map pool this time around, which I think contributed to the whole of the wave as a strength. So thank you very much again. Thank you. There is one big thing that I wanted to talk about with this map wave, though, and that would be the split between in-game and forum voting. We split our voting system into two methods because we wanted to reach out to all the elements of the CTF community who might be interested in the map wave, be they casual players or heavily salted veterans, and then get more detailed information on community preferences. We turned the data from these sources into individual favorability scores, which were then averaged to determine which maps the community rated highest. However, our attempt at weighting these sources of information evenly wasn't entirely successful. Simply put, despite us weighting in-game voting and the voting form evenly, the latter method of voting ended up being more important when it came to selecting maps for rotation. The favorability scores from forum voting ranged from 82 to 29%, with the majority of scores falling between 70 and 40. This was about double the range of the in-game voting, where all but 3 of the scores were between 60 and 75% favorability. As a result, the lower scores that resulted from the voting form tended to drag down maps that had done relatively well in in-game voting. For example, both Quintet Falls 1 and Autumn Spire, which were 5th and 6th in in-game voting respectively, ended up missing the Wave XIII rotation due to middling forum scores. Quite frankly, this was to be expected. The two methods of voting that we used give us responses from different sources who voted on maps in different environments. We can't expect the ranges of forum and in-game voting to line up, or even be relatively close to each other going forward. This then begs the question, are we okay with map selection being skewed more heavily towards forum voting, or do we value in-game voting to an equal or greater extent? Now, when I asked that question at the start of the Wave XIII process, the consensus reply that I got from the community was that the voting form was what they preferred, and that was because it limited the amount of influence that newer and experienced players had on the maps that were being selected, and that it left the decision to players who they considered more experienced, who they figured would be better able to identify good maps. And that sort of makes some sense in theory, but it didn't really hold up this time around. And to be sure, most of the responses we got were carefully considered on that form, but we also got a number of people, a sizable chunk of the voters actually, who just voted no preference on most of the maps that we had. Of course, in-game voting data wasn't perfect either, but in that case, at least we knew that the people voting had actually played the maps they were voting on. However, the bigger issue that I have with that perspective is the idea that's built into it that we shouldn't value the opinions of newer players as much. When CTF was growing, we may have had the luxury to just focus on experienced players. But with the game mode having been in a slow, steady decline for the last few years, we can't afford to exclude newcomers from the decision-making process. And I mean, if we ever want the game mode to grow again, we have to cater to what makes CTF fun for new players and for casual players, at least to some degree. That doesn't mean that the more experienced parts of the community should be ignored or marginalized, but actively favoring them over new players is just not a good long-term strategy for the game mode. And that, of course, can be applied more broadly to the whole of CTF as well, because as with any other longer-lasting game mode, CTF has to attract new players to survive because its regulars are going to age out or going to lose interest over time. The server's been lucky to have a community as dedicated to the game mode as ours, but unfortunately that can't sustain it forever, so we'll have to find ways to make CTF more enticing for new players if it's ever going to grow again. That could be through improving certain classes, through making gameplay more intuitive for new players, or any number of other means, really. But that is another topic, so I'll have to give that a more detailed look in another video. Wave XII did bring some other interesting issues into public view as well, because this was, of course, the second community-based wave we'd done, so we did see more organized attempts to influence voting this time around. And while click-based voting and bandwagon voting are far from desirable, we obviously can't go about policing the reasoning behind people's votes. That would defeat the whole purpose of people voting, because they are going to have different opinions. So therefore, our best option going forward to limit people voting based on personal affiliation or team affiliation, is to design the voting system to discourage those trends, even if eliminating them outright is impossible. And to wrap things up, we did see some new roads being taken with map design. Maps like Chutes, Chernobyl, and Well all made use of barriers to control and funnel gameplay in certain areas, and although that came with mixed results, it could be something that we see more of in the future. And then we also saw a new generation of tunnel maps that focuses on mobility between vertical levels on the maps, usually what I'd almost describe as stories. And that was seen in everything ranging from Airlock 1 to Opposites Collide 7 to Large Hall 1, and it really did sort of define a lot of the maps that got in on the Wave. So there are quite a few more avenues out there still to experiment with when it comes to map design, but that's definitely the way that a number of map makers have gone forward, and it seems pretty popular, at least for the time being. Of course, there's definitely much more to discuss when it comes to Wave 13 and the future of our map waves in general, but I hope this at least served as a good starting point for you guys. And then, on a more personal note, I'd love to make more videos like this, where I'm just discussing things that I think matter for CTF going forward. And I do have a couple more plans, so if this is something you guys find interesting at all, definitely let me know. But that's all for now, and you guys have a good one.